Today on Trucks, it may not look like much now, but this old Bronco is the start of Project Crazy Horse. And Stacey's got a mess on his hands as he begins throwing out the bad and bolting on the good. That's all today on Trucks.
Welcome to Trucks. I hope you're ready for this week's show because today I'm going to start a new build-up on this really sorry 66 Ford Bronco. Now, the direction behind this build-up is number one, to pay tribute to the legendary Big Ole Bronco that absolutely dominated Baja racing in the 70s, with none other than Parnelli Jones behind the wheel and Bill Strope sitting beside him trying to hold everything together. Number two, it needs to be a state-of-the-art trail rig, something that you can crawl rocks and go through mud with the best of them. Also needs to be street legal. Now, I know you're probably thinking, wait a minute, you're going to do all that with this piece of junk? You're crazy. Can't be done. You've gone too far. Well, I figured you'd probably say that. So that's why I'm calling this project Crazy Horse. That and it's going to be really crazy when I get done with it. Today's project deals with one of the most difficult, messy, pain-in-the-butt projects you can possibly do, and that is replacing rusty floor pans. Now, it doesn't matter if you're into cars, trucks, whatever. If you're a how-to guy, you are eventually going to buy a project that's got some rust in the floors. So you either need to know how to do this yourself or take it to somebody to do it for you. But either way, you really need to know what types of tools and techniques are involved. And that is what I'm going to show you. The first thing you need to do is make sure you've got a tetanus shot. Then you need to come in, look the vehicle over, and assess the damage so you know what kind of replacement panels you're going to have. Now to do that, you need to completely gut the interior. Get rid of anything that might be bolted to the floor, like the seats, the top, roll bar, things like that. Here you go, Barry. Watch those edges. All right. Now, here's something that you're not going to see on truck gear. The legendary PVC roll bar. I think this company went out of business. Here it comes, Barry, look out! Okay, with everything apart, you can kind of see what we're going to have to replace. Now, obviously, these floor pans are shot. And also, notice that the cancer goes all the way up here into this toe board. We're going to have to replace all that. Now the cross members, those are pretty solid. This one back here looks good, but here in the very back, that one's shot. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of them just to be safe. Now here's a surprise. Notice our striker panel is completely rusted through, so we're going to have to replace that whole piece. Now the rocker may seem nice here, but it's shot, so we'll need to replace that too. As you can see, we need a lot of stuff. So for floor pans, we went to a place called Wild Horses and got their complete 5-piece floor pan kit. Now these are stamped and formed just like the original pieces, down to the beads in the floor, the hump for the transmission, everything. When you put these in, it'll look just like that Bronco came from the factory. And that is one of the good things about a Bronco. You can buy these preformed panels so you don't have to make them yourself. Now, if you don't need all 5 pieces, you can buy each piece separately. For cross members, rocker panels, and door striker panels, we went to a place called Jeff's Bronco Graveyard. Got these heavy gauge direct replacements that pop right in place of the original pieces once we get them out. Now, you can see they're stamped and formed just like the original parts. Now, Jeff's Bronco Graveyard is a unique place. They not only have top quality new stuff, but they also deal in hard to find used stuff like all metal hoods with no rust and door assemblies, both of which we got just in case we need them. Okay, it's finally time to start cutting, right? No, there's still some prep work that you have to do in here. Now, since I'm going to be cutting out so much of this floor, you need to stress up the body to keep it from flexing and bending and getting out of alignment on you, because if that happens, it's almost impossible to get it all straight again. So the first thing I'm going to do is weld in a support from fender to fender to keep those from moving when I cut out those striker panels. Then we'll run a support down across the door openings. This will support the door and keep it from flexing in on us when we take out the rockers. Okay, it's finally time to start cutting things out. The question is, where the heck do you start? Well, you start at the lowest foundational support. In other words, the floor pan is supported by the cross member, and that's supported by the rocker panel. And that's kind of the beginning of the chain, so that is where we'll start. To get that off, take a drill bit or a spot weld cutter and drill out each one of these spot welds. That takes care of the rocker panel. Now this is a nice surprise. Our inner rocker is really solid, so we're not going to have to replace that. Also, to take out your striker panel, do that the same way, drill your spot welds, and the new pieces just plop right in. Now, I'm going to take a break, change my shirt, and I told you this was a messy project. We'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back to the shop. I'm right in the middle of dealing with some really nasty, rusty floor pans on Project Crazy Horse. Now, before the break, I took care of the rockers and the striker panels, but before I put the new ones in, well, I'm going to deal with some problems that you might run into. Namely, what do you do if you can't get the panels out? Now, if you'll remember, on the rockers, we drilled the spot welds, and they pretty much just fell right out. Now, I'll tell you something right now, those strikers are not going to come out that easy. So what do? Well, you're going to have to cut them out. And as you can see, they come out about an inch at a time, screaming and kicking all the way. Now, the tools that you're going to need to do that is everything from an air nibbler to a sawzall to a cutoff tool, hammer and chisel, and even some snips, all of which you need to have in your arsenal before you ever try this kind of project. Now we're ready to put the new panel in, but before you do, come in here with a grinder, hit this edge, hit all these edges where you're going to be welding so you have some nice clean metal to weld to. Now also notice I've got some paint in here, but it's not just any kind of paint. It's called Miracle Paint from Bill Hirsch Automotive. You can literally paint this stuff right over rust and it'll seal it up and keep it from rusting. Now, I've used that stuff for years and it really works. Now also notice that we've got a rusty panel here. We need to build a patch panel for it, but we don't need to do that yet. We'll do that at the end of the project. All right, slide the panel into place and position it. Now some clamps and a body hammer are perfect for getting it just right. Make sure you're checking it with your door so you know it fits. That's right on. When you have it perfect, tack weld it in place, double check it with your door, and then finish welding it in. Now we're ready for the rocker, and it should pretty much just slide into place. Be prepared though to do a little bit of trimming with the snips to get it to fit just perfect. Now, you're going to want to spend some time here because this is what makes or breaks the look of this truck. Rocker needs to line up with the fender and it also needs to work with the door right. So spend some time here. Now, once you have it right, go ahead and clamp it in place and weld it. Okay, now, finally, we are ready to tackle these old floor pans. This is where you're going to be really glad you got that tetanus shot. Now, getting the old pans off of the cross members can be a little tough because all these spot welds have got to come out just like with the rocker. But an easy way to do it is to cut the floor into sections using the outside of the cross members as a guide. Then just come in here with a chisel and get this old junk off the top. Now, you can use a sawzall to do that, or a cutoff tool. I definitely prefer the sawzall because it's a lot quicker, doesn't make near as big a mess. But before you do any cutting, you need to come under here and make sure you know what's underneath before you unleash that sawzall, because it'll cut anything, including your frame. Also, make sure you don't cut away more than you know the new pans will cover, or you're going to have to go in and patch that later on. Well, that takes care of cutting out the old floors and lays to rest yet another shirt. And that's 2 if you're counting. So we're gonna take a break. But after that, I'm gonna put some floor pans in this sucker. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, if you're just joining us, well, you're way too clean, because we're right in the middle of replacing some rusty floors in Project Crazy Horse. Now, we've already got the rockers and the striker panels in, got the old metal cut out. Now it's time to check out the cross members, because if those are bad, they got to go. Now, you can see we actually lucked out really well, because these are in great shape, except for a little bit of surface rust. So, we're going to take some clamps, straighten up the ears, so the new floors have a nice flat place to mount to. Then we'll hit them with some Miracle Paint. This rear one, we'll just replace that. All right, now take a grinder and smooth off these cross member ears so you have really nice metal to weld to. Then set in your center pan. Now, you should expect to do a little bit of tweaking and twisting on this to make sure it fits just right, but it should pretty much lay right in there. Now, once you're happy with the fit, go ahead and punch some holes for your spot welds. Now, it is very important that these pans fit flush down on the cross members, not only for strength, but also nothing looks more amateurish than a big old gap between a floor pan and the cross member. Remember, if you take your time and do this right, this will look just like a factory install. Once your main pan is tacked into place, go ahead and slide in this rear floor section and check the fit. Now, keep in mind, you may have to do a little bit of trimming to get it just right. And once you're happy with it, go ahead and tack it in place along with this rear floor section. That is fitting great. The last thing we're going to deal with are the toe boards. Now, these are cut just like the original pieces, and that is really nice, because notice you've got a seam running up the side, along the top, down this other side. Now, all we have to do is cut down that line, and this new piece will weld right in there. Now, notice here we've got a problem. We've got a rust hole in this transmission hump, and we don't have a patch panel to fix that. So, we're going to have to custom make that. Well, now you can see what kind of job it is to replace floors and rockers. I went through 3 shirts, put another couple holes in my pants, ended up with some more cuts on my arms, and it completely pegs out our difficulty meter. Now, you might be wondering, if it's that difficult, why the heck would I want to do it? It's a good question. The reason is, with all the parts that I put on this thing today, from Jeff's Bronco Graveyard and Wild Horses, I got about $700 in this thing. Now, I still have some spot welding to do and a little bit of fabrication, but when I'm done, I'm still going to have $700 in it. Now, if you were to pay somebody to do this kind of job, provided you could find somebody to do it right, you'd pay upwards of $5 grand. Now, you just sit there and think about that for a minute. We'll be back.
Today on Trucks, we're turning up the heat on Project Crazy Horse as Stacey adds a new rear suspension, wheels, and tires. And then he's pulling off the body and rolling out the chassis to get to work on replacing the front.
You better keep your rear end planted, because Trucks is starting now. Welcome to Trucks, the show where we get down and dirty and show you how to do the stuff that nobody else dares to do. Case in point, last week I dug into this old '66 Bronco, and before I knew it, I was buried up to my eyeballs in replacing rusty floors. But now that we've showed you how to do that, we're going to move on to the next step of Project Crazy Horse, and that is axles and suspension. Now, eventually, we're going to pull this body completely off the frame to do this project. That's really the only way to do something like this right. Now, you may be wondering, well, why didn't you take the body off first? Wouldn't it be a lot easier to pull the body off before you started everything? Well, there's a couple reasons I didn't do that. First of all, the body was not strong enough to take off. It would have wadded up like a ball of tinfoil. That's why I had to do the floors and rockers first. Also, I'm going to need to do some modification inside this wheel well when I put the rear suspension on. Kind of hard to do that with the body off. So, we're going to start with the rear suspension. Now let me show you the parts we're going to use. Now for rear springs, we got this set of massive rear leaf springs from James Duff Enterprises. And this has 10 leaves. It's got a 3.5-inch lift built right in, and it's got the military style double wrap up here for strength and safety. Now for rear shocks, we got their Stage 2 dual shock kit, which has the brackets, all the hardware, and of course 4 shocks. Now James Duff had a pretty impressive career as a Baja racer himself. He ran right alongside Parnelli Jones, Rod Hall, all those guys in the 70s. He's also been supplying products for Broncos since about '67. That's a pretty impressive record. All right, first thing we need to do is get off the wheels and tires and the old shocks. Now, this old shock mount is going to be a problem because you can see it's welded on, and the new mount's going to go just about where that's at. So, we're going to cut that off with a plasma cutter. Now, make your marks here in the front lower corner of this wheel well according to the instructions. Finally, cut out the piece, but make sure you don't cut too far and cut into the interior of the bed. All right, now we'll go ahead and set the bracket in place. And notice, we're going to have a body lift to clear this bracket, and we're going to put that on, but for now, I'm just going to go ahead and outline this bracket, so once I get the body off, I'll know where the bracket goes, and then we'll just go ahead and drill the holes and mount it. Okay, now we're going to deal with these old springs, so we'll get this old rear end out of the way. Sometimes they go easy, sometimes they go the hard way. Ours decided to go the hard way. As you can see, I had to cut off every single U-bolt because they were so rusty. Of course, you don't want to reuse old U-bolts anyway. Another thing you don't want to reuse are these old brake hoses. You just come in here and cut those dang things off. Now, a prime example of why you don't reuse them, notice how that thing is swollen completely shut. There is no fluid that's going to flow through that line. After that, unbolt the stock springs. Then just slide in the new Duff springs. Now, some of you might be raising an eyebrow about putting this brand new hardware against that rusty frame. Well, I'm just mocking it into place right now. And once I get the suspension all fitting right, I'm going to pull it all back apart, sandblast and paint the frame. Okay, you probably know that the Ford Bronco came with a very stout Ford 9-inch rear end. Unfortunately, ours is completely shot. Now, by the time I upgrade the brakes, you can see somebody did some real creative brake line work here. Stick in a new differential with low gears and a Detroit locker, well, I might as well go ahead and just get a whole new axle, which is exactly what we did. For that, we went to Curry Enterprises. Now, check this out. They specialize in the Ford 9-inch rear end, and we're using their heavy-duty housing. We had them stuff it with 456 gears and a Detroit locker to get everything working together. The axles are 35 spline axles. Now those, if you break one of those, you're doing something hateful. The brakes are their Explorer disc brake kit. Now this is a nice affordable disc brake kit that'll definitely get the job done. Now we also had them extend the housing 1 inch on either side. That way we've got more room to mount those dual shocks. Now, does that mean that this is just a worthless piece of junk? No, no. The street rod guys love these because they're so narrow. This will fit right under a 32 Ford. So, this goes to the swap meet. To install that new Curry rear end, we'll just jack it up to the spring pads and bolt it up. For wheels, those have to be just right. And we're going with a classic rim that also just happens to bear the name of an off-road racing legend. You notice a little theme going here? The name is Mickey Thompson, and these wheels are the Challengers. Now these are not only a forged, very strong, polished aluminum wheel, but they also have that classic style that Crazy Horse has just got to have. Now the size is 15 by 10. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there is only one tire to use on a project like Crazy Horse. the Parnelli Jones tire from Dirt Grip. Now, this isn't just some weenie tire that's got Parnelli's name on it. No, this is a state-of-the-art off-road tire. You can see it's got a very aggressive tread for rocks and mud, but it's also designed in such a way that it will be really nice on the highway. Now, the size is 35/1250, and one of my favorite points is that it not only has Parnelli's name in the sidewall and little PJs up here on the top, but the tread itself is actually big P's and J's. Now, was that cool or what? Now, this takes care of the rear end. After the break, we're going to tear into the front. Welcome back to Trucks and Project Crazy Horse. As you can see, I've got a heck of a mess going here, but that's okay because we're making some good progress. I already have a new axle, brakes, and suspension in the rear. Now, it's time to deal with that front suspension. But before we do that, I'm going to pull that old body off the frame. So, take a deep breath because here we go. Now, believe it or not, there is not a whole lot that holds a Bronco body to the frame. You've got 8 main mounting bolts, and if you're lucky, those will just come right out. But don't be surprised if they're a little rusty like ours were. But either way, they have got to come out. Oh boy, look at that. Now you get to hunt down all the BS connections. Now, I call them that because these are the connections that most people forget to unhook when they pull a body off the frame. And of course, that results in a nasty surprise right in the middle of the lifting process. And this will make you cuss. So, these are connections like a gas filler neck, emergency brake cable, speedometer cables, transmission linkage, steering linkage, hoses, wiring harness. You can see there is a lot of them. Now, the best way to do this is to start at one end and just unhook things as you work your way to the other end. That way, you won't forget anything. All right. All right, come out of there. Okay. All right, come on down. All right, now that we have everything disconnected, it is time to lift this body off. Now, do not even attempt to do something like this on a convertible body style without stressing up the body through the doors to keep it from buckling on you, even if you have new floors and rockers. Now, obviously, I'm using a lift, and that's the easiest way to do it, but you can take a body off using floor jacks and jack stands. I've done it. It just takes a little longer. Now, when you're lifting the body off, it's very important that you watch these door seams. If they're widening up on you or getting narrower, stop, you're flexing the body. You need to set it down and stress it up better. Now, once you get the body up in the air, we're going to go ahead and just roll the chassis out to where we can work on it. Now, as you probably guessed, that whole front suspension and that old stock axle is going to go. And we need to put in something strong enough to handle the abuse that we're going to put on this thing. So, if you'll follow me over to the table, I'll show you what we're going to use. Once again, we went to James Duff Enterprises for our front suspension. Now, the kit we're using is a 3.5-inch lift long travel kit. Now, here's what it consists of. We got extended radius arms with a bend in them for tire clearance, all the bushings and brackets that it takes to mount these up. We've got their shock hoops, and we're going to mount dual shocks on each side, new coil springs, and of course, all the hardware that's going to take to mount this up, which we're going to do, but after the break. Welcome back to Trucks. All right, a quick update for those of you that are getting here late. We've already put a new Curry 9-inch rear end and a James Duff suspension in the rear of Project Crazy Horse. Then we lifted the body off, and now I'm cutting this old front suspension out. Now, since our new extended radius arms are going to mount a good bit back from the originals, this needs to be cut off. So instead of trying to unbolt this old rusty arm, shoot, I just torched the whole thing. Also, remember, you're going to have to cut off your original shock mounts too. Then we'll just slide that whole mess right out from under there. Now, There's very little of this that we're going to be able to reuse. Matter of fact, most of it is just junk. So a lot of this is going to the scrap heap. Okay, to mount your new radius arm brackets, measure back 10¼ inches from the stock bracket, and then just drill your holes and bolt it on. Now, since this is your main suspension mount, I strongly suggest running a weld bead around this too for strength. The new shock hoops are next, and they just slide right onto the frame and bolt up here to the spring bucket. Now, to mount them on, you just drill the hole and bolt them down. But I strongly suggest running a weld around there because these parts are under a lot of stress, just like the radius arms. All right, now we're ready to put these big old radius arms in place. And notice they've got a big heim joint back here to allow them to move and flex, not get in any kind of bind. And these are heavy duty. Notice they've got the bend for the big tires, and they also have shock mounts already built in. These things are ready to go. Now, I know you're wondering about the front axle. Man, we got to have something cool to match that 9-inch Ford in the rear. So we went back to Curry Enterprises and had them put together a heavy-duty Dana 44. Now, it's got 456 gears, just like the rear, but it's got a true track limited slip, which is a great application for a front axle. Now, from here on out, it's all James Duff stuff. We've got their knuckles, we've got their steering arms, and the crowning jewel is this massive disc brake kit. Now, that'll get everything stopped in a hurry. Now, there's no doubt that this is an awesome axle, and it's going to be a mother in the front of that Bronco, but we're out of time for this project for today, so we're going to have to continue it next week.
Today on Trucks, Project Crazy Horse is kicking in the barn as Stacey's bolting on a new front axle, spring, shocks, wheels, and tires. And that old straight six, it's headed straight to the glue factory.
There's only one place to learn how to build stuff like this: trucks. Welcome to Trucks and our growing pile of junk. Now, a few weeks ago, we started a build-up on an old, beat-up, dilapidated old Ford Bronco to see if we could resurrect it from an old, rusty piece of junk. And in the meantime, show you some how-to that you can use on your project, whether it's a Bronco or not. So the first thing we did is put in new floor pans. Then last week, raised the body up off the chassis, then put in a new rear suspension. Now we got new springs, 3.5-inch lift, a dual shock system, and of course a new 9-inch Ford rear end. Then we ran out of time. So this week we're going to finish up the front suspension, but not just that. We're going to take this old engine and tranny out of here, deal with some steering issues. So strap on your tool belt because we are going to finish laying out the chassis of Project Crazy Horse. All right, the suspension front and rear is from James Duff Enterprises. And like I said before, we got a 3.5-inch lift on the rear. We're going to do the same thing on the front. Now, as you can see, we've already got these new extended radius arms in. We did that last week. So now it's time to put in this new axle. Now, just in case you've forgotten, this is a Dana 44 from Curry Enterprises. 456 gears, just like the rear. The arms and the brakes are all from James Duff. The best part is, this will slide right into place like a stock axle. Now we're using these new polyurethane bushings because that gives us the right caster, and also it will last a lot longer and work a lot better than these stock rubber ones. Just make sure you use some grease on these or they're going to squeak on you. One of the few original pieces that we have to reuse are these old caps. Now these actually bolt to the front of the radius arm and they hold your axle in. So if you'll hit them with a wire brush and a coat of paint, check this out. They will look like brand new. Now, I know you're going to be tempted to reuse all this old mounting hardware. No, don't do it. They actually hold your axle in. It costs you about $10 to replace them, and that is not where to get cheap. Now we're ready for the new coil spring. Now you're going to love this. Notice there is a huge difference between this new spring and this old stocker. Now they were trying to do something with these spacers, but we'll go ahead and just roll that away to the trash heap. Now, a couple of original pieces that you are going to have to reuse is the lower spring cup and the lock. So go ahead and set those in place. Then rotate the spring into the lock, and then just seat the spring into the pocket up here on the top. Then it's held in place with this little clip. Man, it's nice when they fit like this. Next, we're going to bolt on these dual shocks. Now they run all the way from the shock hoop down here to the radius arm. Now you have a couple choices here. You can mount 2 shocks behind the spring like we've done, so give you a little softer ride, a little more axle flex, or you can mount 1 shock behind the spring and 1 out here in front. That'll give you a little firmer ride. Now if you do it that way, you're going to need to take this tab that comes with the kit and weld it down here on the cap. Just make sure you take the cap off because you don't want to melt that urethane. With the new shocks in place, it is time for the drop bracket for the track bar. Now you have to use one of these if you're using a 3.5-inch lift, because that is what's going to center that axle when you're all done. Now it just slides onto the stock bracket, tap it into place, then just bolt it on. Now I strongly recommend that you run a weld around that just like you did the shock hoops, give you some extra strength. Now we come to the last part of the original suspension that you're going to have to reuse, and that is the track bar. Now we went ahead and cleaned it up, painted it, put in new urethane bushings, and heck, this thing's ready to go in. Now for those of you that don't know, anytime that you have a coilover suspension and a solid axle, well, you need some sort of track bar to keep that axle from moving side to side. Now what happens over time is that these bushings will wear out, or the hole will get sloppy, and that will allow the axle to move just a little bit. That causes the vehicle to dart to one side or the other. Of course, what do? You go to correct it, and now you're wandering all over the road. So having new bushings in your track bar is very important. Okay, we're going to follow that up with the wheels and tires. Ta-da! Now, you may remember from last week that we put Parnelli Jones and Mickey Thompson on the same team. Now, we did that by using Mickey Thompson Challenger wheels because they look so cool and they're very strong. And we wrap those with the Parnelli Jones Dirt Grip tires. And these have a very aggressive tread for mud and rocks and stuff like that. They'll also do us well on the highway. Now, why don't you step back and take a look and kind of digest on what we've done. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? All except for that old engine. I'm going to do something with that, but after the break. Welcome back to Trucks. The last time I pushed this thing in, well, it was a major piece of junk. Now it's starting to really look like something. All right, now that we've got a new suspension underneath this chassis, front and rear, we're going to deal with an area that's almost always bad on an old four-wheel drive, and that's the steering. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to rebuild this old steering box for a few reasons. First, it's a manual unit. Second of all, this old stub shaft is completely stripped and it's got a hole drilled in it. And check out that slop. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and unbolt it from the frame and retire that for good. Oh, strike. Now, for our new steering system, we went back to James Duff Enterprises, got one of their new power steering boxes. Now, this is a must if you are running 35-inch or bigger tires. Now, to go with that, we also got their dropped pitman arm, the drag link, and of course the tie rod to hold everything together. To install the new box, all you do is set it into the stock location here and bolt it in. I wish it was all that easy. Now, a little tip here for you. Behind the box is real susceptible to rust on the frame. So it's a good idea to take a little paint and paint it back there. Now, obviously, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to sandblast and paint this frame when we're all done. Now, once you have your box in place, go ahead and put on your pitman arm, drag link, and tie rod, and you are done with the steering. Okay, now that we've got the suspension taken care of, it is time to say goodbye to this old 6-cylinder, 3-speed, and transfer case combination. Now, before you come in here and just start ripping things apart, you need to take some time and remove the parts you might reuse and set them aside, like this old clutch linkage. Then you can start tearing things apart. Now, once you got it all disconnected, unbolt the engine and the transmission from the mounts and lift that sucker out of there. Now, anytime you start changing engines, well, that usually means that your motor mounts are going to need to be changed, and our old Bronco is no exception. These mounts for the old 6-cylinder are in completely the wrong place for the big old V8 we're going to stick in here. So they've got to come off. Out comes the plasma cutter. We'll follow that up with a grinder to dress up this frame rail to get it nice and smooth for our new mounts. Now, it is very important that those new mounts fit nice and flush against that frame, so do whatever grinding and trimming that you have to get it right. All right, for our new motor mounts for our V8, we went to James Duff Enterprises and got these motor mounts, and they fit right here. All you do is measure back 9 inches from the cross member and weld them in. Now, these take away all of the guesswork, all the measurements that go with converting to a V8. Matter of fact, when you get ready to put that new motor in, boom, it should fit like a glove. Now, I know it's time to take a break, but after the break, I'm going to show you what else we're going to do to this frame. You're not going to want to miss that. Man, what a show so far. Now, we've got new axles and suspension in Project Crazy Horse, big old tires. We upgraded the steering, then welded in motor mounts for a new small block Ford V8. Now, you may be thinking, well, shoot, that pretty much takes care of the chassis. What else is there? Well, there's a little bit to do to the frame, and it's right up here in front. Now, remember how these old frame rails were all boogered up? Somebody welded this junk on there. So I went ahead and cut it off and ground it down to where they're like stock again. Now, this is very important because the bumpers that I'm going to use are going to bolt right to the stock frame rail. Now, I know at the mention of bumpers that your eyes probably lit up and you're thinking, bumpers? What kind of bumpers are you going to use? Well, they're right over here. Let's go check them out. Now, there's a lot of different styles of bumper out there for the Bronco, but one of the coolest are the pre-runner styles like this from James Duff. Now, the features of these is they have the tubular design, so it's lighter weight, but they're still very strong. Now, this particular bumper for the front has mounting points for off-road lights and, of course, a winch. You gotta have a winch. And the rear bumper already has a receiver hitch built right in. Okay, to mount the bumper to the frame, if you were just to bolt it on here, well, you would bend this part of the frame because it's not boxed in here. It's not that strong. That is what these inserts are for. They slide into the frame, give you a fully boxed end that you just mount the bumper to. That is very strong. All right, that takes care of the chassis. Now, the only thing we have left to do, now that all the grinding and fitting and welding is done, is take it all back apart, sandblast the chassis, and paint it. But all the hard work is done. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, man, that's a pretty happening chassis, but what about this old body? At least from the firewall forward, this thing is pretty rough. So what are we going to do? Well, I made one call to Jeff's Bronco graveyard. Let me show you what I got. Now, see how these panels are all rusty and beat up here? Well, check this out. Brand new replacement panels. Now, you see you got some damage or some rust in the wheel wells? Look at this. Just like the factory. Now, how about the core support? The area that supports the front of the truck and the radiator. You're going to love this. Doesn't get any better than that. And how about exterior pieces like the grill? They're always beat up. Well, how about a new grill and all the trim pieces and the lights? Now, you're probably thinking that I have a ton of body work to do to beat those old fenders back into shape. And if I was going to reuse them, that's exactly what I'd have to do. But heck, for about $150, you can get brand new all-steel fenders. Now check these out. They are stamped just like the originals, and they fit perfect. That is one of the good things about a Bronco. Almost every piece that came on that truck originally, well, it's available at places like Jeff's Bronco Graveyard. That just goes to show you that old Broncos don't really die. They just keep going and going and going, but We can't do that. We got to take a break.
Today on Trucks, Project Crazy Horse is back in the stable and ready for some horses of its own.
Welcome to Trucks. We have got a kickin' show for you today. Now, the last couple weeks, we've been working on Project Copperhead, which is a very cool, very hot 67 Chevy street truck. Well, this week, we're going to turn our attention back to our old 66 Ford Bronco, known as Crazy Horse. We're going to stick in an engine and drivetrain, so this thing will kick some booty out on the trail. But before we do that, well, let me bring you up to date on what I've done with this chassis so far. If you've been following this project, well, you saw us install the James Duff suspension and the Curry axles and steering and the motor mounts, etc., etc. Then I took it all back apart, had the frame sandblasted, then I shot on a good thick coat of House of Colors epoxy primer, followed by House of Colors Passion Pearl Purple for color, and a lot of coats of clear. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, shoot, aren't you just going to scratch that paint up? Well, yeah, probably. So I'll just fix it. The point is, whenever you take something down this far, it really is worth your while to spend a little extra time and money putting on some good quality paint materials. Trust me, you won't regret it later on. Now, the engine, we also showed you that a few weeks ago. Now, it's a 302, stroked out to a 350, dynoed at 390 horsepower by Keith Dorton at Automotive Specialists. Now, today's project is not just how to put an engine in, it's the whole drivetrain that goes behind it, and it needs to be strong, and it is. It's right over here. Let's go check it out. Since our Bronco originally had a standard shift, well, we wanted to keep it that way. It's a lot more fun, but we want more than 3 forward gears. So we went to Advanced Adapters, got one of their NV 3550 5-speed kits. Now, this comes with a center force clutch and pressure plate. You've got the all-important bell housing adapter. Got a new cross member, all the hardware, transmission mount, and of course an NV 3550 5-speed. Now, the reason this is such an excellent swap for the early Bronco is the length is almost exactly what your stock 3-speed is. The weight, almost exactly what your stock 3-speed is. It'll also handle around 450 foot-pounds of torque in a 5,000-pound rig, so strength shouldn't be a problem. The best part is you got 5 forward gears. The first thing we're going to do is mount that new cross member into the frame, and it bolts right to the stock holes. So it's a good idea to take a tap and clean out the threads. Now, here is something that you see a lot on an older vehicle. Notice that we've got a stud broken off in here. So to get that out, take a punch, stick it right in the center of the stud. This will put a dimple right in the center of the bolt. Now, drill a pilot hole down the center of the bolt. Then we'll step up to a bigger bit to enlarge this hole. Just make sure you don't get into those original threads. Then we'll take a tool called an easy out or a screw extractor, which is basically a hardened piece of steel that has little teeth in it that'll grip the bolt when you remove it. And you just slide that in the hole and tap it in place. Now, carefully rotate the easy out. You want to make sure you don't break these things off, because if you do, they're almost impossible to get out. Now, once it starts to turn like this, usually they start to come out pretty easy. Make sure you use plenty of penetrating lube on them. And it's also a good idea to chase these threads once you get everything out. There you go. All right, there you go. Finally, with all that taken care of, we can set the new cross member in place and then just finger tight the bolts. Okay, now it is time to get this new engine ready. The first thing we're going to do is bolt on this new flywheel that we got from Ford Racing. Now, here's a couple tips for you. If you are thinking about reusing an old flywheel, well, first you need to check it for any kind of stress cracks, then have it resurfaced, and make sure that you check the starter ring gear. As you can see, this is buggered up pretty bad. That would need to be replaced if we were going to reuse this. Now, something you should never reuse is a clutch plate, pressure plate, or a throwout bearing. I don't care how good they look. That's not the place to get cheap, so replace them. With the flywheel in, it's time to put in that new clutch and pressure plate. Now, this clutch alignment tool does not come with the kit, but it is definitely worth the extra $5 or $6 to go get one because it lines everything up, so when you go to install the tranny, it just slides right in. Okay, now we're ready to turn our attention to that transmission. The first thing we'll do is slide on this aluminum adapter plate from the kit, then take a pen and mark around these upper bolt holes on either side. Then we'll take a grinder, grind a notch here in this mounting flange so we've got clearance for our mounting bolts. Using Loctite on the supplied hardware, we'll go ahead and bolt the adapter to the transmission. Moving on, it's time for the bell housing. Now this is just an old stock bell housing that I picked up used, cleaned it up and painted it. Now, notice when I set this thing into place, we got a problem. It's going to hit this shift rail. So, what we're going to have to do is modify this vent hole. Now the best way to do that is to drill some pilot holes and then take a die grinder with a rotary file on it and just open this up. Just remember, when you have to do this, you don't want to cut all the way down into that indexing ring. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break while I finish this up. But after the break, well, we're going to put all this stuff together. We'll see you then. Welcome back to the truck shop. Well, we are right in the middle of putting a tough little 5-speed behind this hot 302, and it is all going to go in that old 66 Bronco. Now, we've already got our bell housing modified, which means it is time for the clutch fork. Now, you're going to have to use an original clutch fork on this application. So you're going to want to check it and make sure that it's not damaged on the ends. Now, if you need a replacement fork, well, you can get one from Jeff's Bronco Graveyard. Now, some other things that you want to get from Jeff's is a new fork boot, bushings for all the linkage, and of course any linkage pieces that might be destroyed. For example, look at this cobbled up piece of junk. Now, I hope I don't have to tell you not to reuse something like this. Okay, now that we've got the fork and the new throwout bearing on, we'll take the whole bell housing assembly, slide it onto the block, and bolt it up. All right, Barry, you about ready?
Just about.
Now it is time to bolt this new 5-speed up to the engine. Now it just slides into place, but you're definitely going to need an extra set of hands because they never just slide into place. All right, you ready?
Yep.
Here we go. Easy. Okay, careful through the throw it, Barry. Okay, now real easy. There it goes. All right, Barry, roll that thing in here.
All right.
Now, with your motor mounts and your transmission mounts in place, it is time for the moment of truth to set this thing in the chassis where it belongs. Okay, go ahead and lower it down. Slowly.
Slowly.
There you go. Looks good. Looks good. Right there. A little further. Transmission's in. Yes. Looks perfect. All right. There you go, Barry.
All right.
Thank you. Now, as you can see, this thing literally just dropped into place. All the mounts were exactly where they were supposed to be. I love it when they fit like that. Now, we are ready for the four-wheel drive part of this project, which means a transfer case. So for that, we went back to Advanced Adapters and got their bulletproof Atlas II transfer case. Now, the Atlas is a gear-driven transfer case with a one-piece body for superior strength. Now, you can get these in 3 different ratios. The 4.3 for super low gearing, the new 3.0 Highlander for higher gearing, or the one like we've got, which is the 3.8. It's right between those two, and it's going to work perfect with our axle ratios, transmission gearing, and our tire size. Now, the Atlas shifts with twin sticks, so you got a lot of control in your axles, and you have shift on the fly capabilities. To put it real blunt, the Atlas 2 is the toughest transfer case on the market, period. End of story. Now, remember when I told you earlier how I loved it when things just popped into place? Well, that's because they don't always do that. I know you know what I mean. Well, the James Duff suspension stuff works perfect on a stock Bronco. All the advanced adapter stuff, perfect on a stock Bronco. Now, when you add components together, though, sometimes they don't mesh perfectly. Let me show you what I mean. You notice I can't push this transfer case all the way up against the transmission. I've got some clearance problems down here. So I'm going to go ahead and notch these holes, slide the cross member forward, and that'll take care of that. I also notice over here, when I rotate the transfer case up, I'm going to hit this Duff mount right here. So I'm going to have to grind a little notch there so that'll clear, and that'll take care of it. Unfortunately, I don't have time to do all that today, so that's a project for another day. But after the break, we're going to show you some more cool stuff. There you go. Welcome back to the shop, where I'm doing some of the final fit and finish on Project Crazy Horse, and it is going to be awesome. As you can see, I've got the engine, the transmission, drivetrain pretty well taken care of. Now it's time for the gas tank. Now, the tank we're going to be using, I got from Wild Horses, and it's EPA approved, 20 gallons. As you can see, it's got all the vents and tubes so you can run fuel injection or a carburetor. Now, it also comes with all the hardware and the hoses to put it in, but we forked out a little extra, got this really thick skid plate to protect the bottom of the tank from rocks and trees and things like that. Now, the first thing we're going to do is put in this sending unit. Make sure you use some sealant on the gasket. Then install a sender so the float goes out into the body of the tank. You don't want it over in here. Well, then slide it in and bolt it on. Take some thin rubber strips, lay them on the skid plate so you don't have any metal-to-metal contact. Then take the gas tank, set it down on the skid plate, and then just jack it into place. The tank is held in place with these straps and these J-bolts. They come with a kit and go right into the stock holes on the frame. Now, you will need to take a rotary file, kind of open those holes up a little bit, because this new hardware is a little thicker than the stock stuff. Now, when you tighten everything up, it lifts that tank until these little feet come in contact with the body of the truck, and the tank's mounted. Now, one other thing that you do have to permanently mount to the door jamb is this little sticker. Now, this certifies that this tank meets all the safety and emissions requirements of a new tank. Very important. Well, there it is, Project Crazy Horse, the chassis. What do you think? Well, I can't wait to get this thing out and get it off-road. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what about the body? Well, the next time we work on this truck, we're going to deal with the body and the interior, but not today. That's for another show. But we're not done today. We got more trucks right after this. Welcome to trucks. Today we're going to deal with a subject that every enthusiast, professional, amateur, it doesn't matter. You're eventually going to have to deal with this, and it's how to strip a body and get it ready for paint. Now, I'm talking about all over, top, bottom, wheel wells, everything. You got a couple choices here. You can have it media blasted, or you can have it dipped. But either way, you're going to have to take it somewhere. This is not something that you can do in your driveway. So today we're going to deal with media blasting, what you should expect, what it costs. We're going to answer all those questions, but before we do that, we're going to give you just a little recap of the buildup of this old '66 Bronco, Project Crazy Horse, and how it came to be in this condition. It all started with an old beat-up '66 Ford Bronco that I literally had to push into the shop. The first order of business was to cut out the old rusty floors and rockers and replace them with new metal. Then it was time to do something about the suspension, axles, and the wheels and tires. Of course, we've got to have a hot drivetrain, so 400 horsepower and 5 forward gears was assembled and laid to rest in the newly painted chassis. Finally, we tore into the rest of the body, and when the smoke cleared, I had replaced everything but the rear fenders and a piece of the firewall. Now that we're all up to date, here's what you need to do before you go see the stripper. You need to completely disassemble the vehicle. Now, I'm talking everything: tail lights, weather stripping, all the little rubber grommets, everything's got to come off. Then you need to rig up some sort of rotisserie like this so you can transport the vehicle down there. Now, we got this from a place called Accessible Systems. Believe me, this is a lifesaver on this kind of project. Now, once all your prep work is done, well, it's time to hunt down a stripper. We've got the perfect place for you. It's in Lebanon, Tennessee. It's called Blast from the Past, and people literally come from all across the nation to see the stripper named Heavy Duty take it all off.
I started collecting them, and I said, you know, boy, I would like to have some sleeves.
Now, normally you wouldn't think that a lot of people would go see a stripper named Heavy Duty, but obviously you're thinking of the wrong kind of stripper. Heavy Duty is the owner of Blast from the Past and has been stripping and blasting for 29 years. We're going to get him to walk us through the process.
They all want to be stripped. They all want to come back to life again.
Yeah, put some brakes on here before this thing runs you right to the wall. The first question that pops into people's minds is, isn't this just sandblasting? Something that anybody can do with a cheap blaster and a bucket of sand?
For me to achieve the kind of finish that I want, that my customers want, this is what I use right here. This is aluminum oxide. We use this media on bodies that have a lot of surface rust, a lot of undercoating, things of that nature that's combined. And it puts a real slick satin finish on it. This is 120 grit aluminum oxide. This is a T5 acrylic plastic that we can strip fiberglass cars with, you know, anything kind of Corvettes, whatever.
It feels like beach sand.
It is. It's just, you know, it's just real ground up fine stuff. And I opted to use this over this product right here. This being so coarse of a plastic. This, believe it or not, cuts more paint than this does. We mainly stick with these two products right here. These two right here are the ones that we use the most of.
With all the preliminary work done and Crazy Horse resting comfortably in the blasting bay, it's time to start stripping. Welcome back to Trucks, where we are showing you what's involved in the media blasting process. As you can see, we are at Blast from the Past, and they are getting ready to start blasting, so let's get to it. In mechanical stripping, safety is a major concern because it could easily destroy your lungs without proper ventilation. It could also do some serious physical damage if you accidentally get a finger or a leg in front of the nozzle. The operator needs to be completely protected with a full helmet and fresh air supply, and very thick clothing and gloves to protect his body. All right, check out how easily the media peels off about 6 layers of paint and leaves the metal with a nice rough surface that's perfect for fillers or primer. Also, notice how much dust this thing kicks up. Another good reason for not doing this in your driveway.
Stripping, the advantages to it is you're right there. You have control over what you're doing of the area. If you see that something's blowing apart, you can stop, you can work around it. You know that area is going to be cut out and there's going to be brand new metal in it. So you go out on the outskirts of that and blast it. chemical dipping, you know, it's like you dip it in the tank and you pull it out. It's what it is.
One of the key techniques of a good operator is to strip the metal and not overheat the panels and warp them. That is where knowing your medias and how to handle the nozzle are extremely important. Yet another reason for not trying this in your driveway with a bucket of sand. Here is where a rotisserie is worth its weight in gold. It allows you to roll the rig up on its side to get to the fender wells in the bottom. Without it, Heavy would be rolling around on his back underneath this thing, and that would definitely put him in a foul mood. One of the major problem areas on any vehicle, and especially the early Bronco, the inner fenders and wheel tubs. They hold mud and water, and they rust the fender from the inside out. Believe me, there is no way you're going to be able to get up there and get that out yourself. A media blaster like this is the only way, and it makes it look easy.
I love doing this right here. Yeah. It's like every day to me is like a holiday. When I get up and come out here, it's like a Saturday.
Oh man, look at that. Completely stripped, completely clean, top, bottom, wheel wells, everywhere. Look at that, pure virgin metal. Now, anytime you have something stripped though, do not be surprised to find all kinds of little nasty things that have been hidden over the years, like this creative bodywork here. Now, that's easy to fix though, that won't take very long. Matter of fact, this whole body is in excellent shape now. This is ready to go. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, well, shoot, you know, Stacey, that's great, but I just want to strip my truck so I can paint it. Do I have to do all of this? Well, the answer is no. If you're just going to have it done like that, you can roll it right into the shop, they'll tape it off, and they can strip it like that. If you're going to go to a dipper, well, you're going to have to do this. Now, hopefully, that gives you an idea kind of what's involved in the media blasting process. We'll be back after this. Welcome to Trucks. If you've watched this show at all in the last year or so, you probably have a pretty good idea what is on that rotisserie. Now, if you're new to the show, or you don't get a chance to watch it very much, let me bring you up to speed. This is the body of a 1966 Ford Bronco, Project Crazy Horse, and I've completely reconstructed it here on the show, replacing everything but a piece of that firewall and those two rear fenders. This is how it went. It started out as a $350 piece of junk that I pushed into the shop, and the first thing I did was replace the floor pans, cross members, and the rockers. Then I chopped out the door strikers and the inner structures and replaced those with new metal. Finally, I finished it off with new inner fenders, wheel tubs, and a core support. And of course, new fenders, giving me basically a brand new body. Now, it's no secret that my paint booth is literally stacked to the roof with other projects and junk. So the next deal was to find somebody to paint this for me. Now remember, I'm building this to pay tribute to Big Ole, the Bronco that Parnelli Jones won Baja with in the 1970s. So, I knew exactly how I wanted the paint scheme to be, and it had to be special. You're not going to believe who I had paint this. This was painted by the Nashville Auto Diesel College. That's right, a bunch of students. Now I know what you're thinking. You had a bunch of students paint Crazy Horse? What, are you crazy? No, I'm not, and here's why. First of all, they have some of the best instructors in the nation, and they keep a watchful eye on the students and teach them in tools and techniques. Second, in a few months, these students are going to be working in shops all across the nation on your vehicles. So somebody needs to take a chance on them, and I figured now is as good a time as any to see if they know what they're doing. And as you can see, they really did a great job. Now, the two colors that I picked for this project both come from House of Colors, and this purple is called Passion Pearl, and this silvery white is called Snow White Pearl, and they work really well together. This two-tone look is very similar to what the original Big Ole had. Of course, Ole was gold down here and white up on the top. Now, the students did a really good job laying out this line, getting it straight, and burying it in the clear. Now, Big Ole also had a big horseshoe on the door for its sponsor, Olympia Beer, so I needed something special on the door of this project. Now, this airbrushed Crazy Horse was not done by a student. This was done by airbrush artist Johnny Watson, And the amazing thing about Johnny is he doesn't use any patterns. He does it all freehand. I basically said, I want a horse's head in the door, back into flames over the rear tire, and boom, this is what he laid out. Let's take a look at the details. You have a snort coming out of a flared nostril with bared teeth. You have a glint in the eye. Check out all of those individual little hairs. Then of course it flows into flames. Each flame has its own pinstripe, and then of course it's buried in clear so you won't feel an edge anywhere. Okay, how about a hood? Oh, you Bronco guys are going to love this. This is brand new from Wild Horses. It's called their High Country Hood. It's a fiberglass cowl induction hood. Got a big cowl induction scoop here in the center, and then two smaller scoops out here on the sides. And of course it comes with all the hardware, the pins, the hinges, everything to mount this on. Now the hood was painted once again by the students and striped. Then of course the word Crazy Horse was brought out by Johnny Watson. Now, just in case you think that Crazy Horse is in danger of becoming a trailer queen, oh no, man, think again. The whole idea behind this project is to show you how to build something that looks really good, but it'll also handle whatever you can throw at it on the highway or in a hardcore off-road situation. And if I scratch the paint, which I will, heck, I'll just fix it. If I break the axle or hurt the motor, I'll just fix them. That's why you want to learn how to do this kind of stuff. It gives you tremendous freedom with your vehicle. You're going to find there's really nothing you can't fix once you know how. Now, the moment of truth, mounting that body down on this chassis. Now, for the mounting points, we went to James Duff Enterprises, got this 2-inch body lift. It comes with the urethane bushings and the 2-inch spacer. Set it down there, put the body on top, bolt it on. When you go to set a body back on a chassis, having an overhead lift or a hoist can really be nice. However, if you don't have one, about 6 healthy guys can manhandle a Bronco body pretty easy. Either way, you'll want to go slow and make sure that everything's fitting properly. Now you can see why I kept telling you how important it is to keep checking your alignment and your clearance and all your measurements when you are reconstructing a body. If you mess up any of these measurements when you're rebuilding one of these things, when you drop the body down on the chassis, it's not going to fit. And the last thing that you want to do at this point is to go back and cut and fit and weld on a freshly painted body. Now, what you want it to do is drop straight down on all the holes to line up like ours just did. This is where all the time that you spent when you were building it really pays off. This is what it should look like. Check out the fit around the steering box, the firewall, the headers, the front shock hoops, even the rear shocks. Okay, to get the full effect, I put on the grill, put on the hood, and rolled it out to where you can get a really good look at it. Man, that is sweet. I love it when they start to come together like this. Now, obviously, I have got a lot of reassembly to do, but not today, in a couple weeks. Got something for you two-wheel drive guys after the break. You know, there comes a time in every project when all the fabrication and fitting is done, and it's finally time to start putting things back together and doing something with all these parts you've been accumulating for who knows how long. Now, of course, the amount of time you spent fabricating and fitting will directly affect how easy it all goes back together. But one thing is for sure, this is where it all starts to pay off, because this is where you really start to see the fruits of your labor. So, follow along as we jump into the final stages of Project Crazy Horse. First things first, when you're working on an older vehicle, one of the worst jobs to have to do is to try to restore and reuse old hardware. What a pain in the butt. So, investing in a new hardware kit is one of the smartest things you can do. Now this is made by Totally Stainless, specifically for the early Bronco, and you can get it from Auto Crafters. Now look at this. This is literally every nut and bolt and screw that you're going to need to reconstruct the body of that Bronco. It's all 100% stainless steel, and it is all marked and labeled exactly where it goes. This is a huge time saver. Now, we also got some other stuff from Auto Crafters: hardware, weather stripping, a new dash pad, firewall cover. headlight and taillight trim. Look at these mirrors. This is a bullet style mirror that was on the early Shelby Mustangs, and they look great on an old Bronco. If you've got an early Bronco, Auto Crafters probably has some parts you need. Since this is a half cab truck, the first thing I'm going to do is bolt in this bulkhead. Now notice I've already drilled my holes for my roll bar. That's because it's a lot easier to do with that bulkhead out. Now we're ready for the roll bar. We got this dual bar from Wild Horses, and it pretty much just slides into place. And this brings up a safety issue. Don't just bolt the bar to the floor. It's not strong enough. You're going to have to use some sort of backing plate behind there so the bolts don't rip out if you roll it over or wreck it. Most bars don't come with backing plates, so you're going to have to make them. So with the pattern marked on some steel plate, cut it out, then drill your mounting holes. Finally, bolt the bar in. Back inside the cab, got the metal dash in place and those new digital gauges that we got from Wild Horses. Now, is that cool or what? Now, the new dash pad slides over the metal dash and is held in place with some of those stainless steel screws. We also got these Pro Car Rally seats from Wild Horses. And since I've already built on my bracketry, it's just a matter of bolting these in. Next up is the restraint system, and you need something good, especially if you're going to be wheeling the rig hard. Now, I'm going to use a complete 5-point harness that I got from Crow Enterprises, and it consists of a big 3-inch wide lap belt, 3-inch wide shoulder belts, and a 2-inch wide and a submarine belt to keep you from sliding out from underneath. And of course, they're all connected at a quick release latch. Now, the good thing about using a kit like this is you don't have to use it all the time. If you're just going down the road to the store, just use the lap belt. If things are a little more serious, use the shoulder belts. If you're running Baja, well, you're probably going to have to use all 5. Okay, where to bolt them, frame or body? Well, if you've got a vehicle that's got a body bolted down onto a frame, you need to bolt to the body, and here's why. Even though they're bolted together, that frame is going to move and flex a little differently than the body, especially if you've got a body lift. And if your seat belts go all the way down to that frame, well, you can actually get pinched in your seat by your seat belts in some extreme situations. Not good. So we're going to go to the body, but you need a strong mounting point, not just to the floor pan. You don't want those bolts to come pulling out. So we're going to have to use a backing plate just like we did with the roll bar. All right. Up to now, everything has been pretty much sliding right back into place. Now it is time to cut the hole for the new shifter in these brand new floor pans. That's pretty much a matter of just lining up the cut lines with the transmission underneath. Now notice I have drilled some perimeter holes from below so we know exactly where that shifter opening needs to be. A jigsaw, sawzall, or a cutoff tool work best for these type of cuts. For shifters, of course, our Atlas II transfer case comes with its own shifter levers. But for the transmission, we're going to go with B&M's short throw sport shifter to give us shorter, firmer shifts. And it just bolts onto that NV3550 tranny using 4 bolts. On the Bronco, the transfer case shift levers come right up under the driver's leg. But notice that these levers are custom bent so they clear. While I'm under here, it's a good time to put in these massive drive shafts that I got from High Angle Driveline. Now, they not only build ultra strong drive shafts, but I've got a pretty severe angle kicking out the front of this transfer case. And this shaft has a CV joint that'll go up to 42 degrees. That's plenty. Man, this is heavy. Next, we're going to turn our attention to the body. Now, obviously, this body has been cut for fender flares, and we're going to put some back on there. But your average fiberglass Bronco fender flare is just not enough flare for that big a tire. So we made a call to James Duff Enterprises and got these huge 4-inch trail flex flares that are gonna look absolutely smoking on the side of this Bronco. And they're more flexible than you can imagine. You can absolutely punish these things on the trail and never have to worry about breaking them or ripping them or tearing them. Ooh, that's nice. To mount the flare, clamp the fiberglass mounting flange to the fender in the proper location, then just mark inside the flange. Now cut out the fender with a jigsaw. Make sure you protect your paint with masking tape. With your flange screwed into place, take your flare and set it over the flange. Then just mount it on with the supplied hardware, and that is it. Now look at that. That looks really good, doesn't it? I told you it would, and you guys can quit cringing that I cut into that really nice paint. I know you were. Now, while we're here, what about this gas cap? Oh, you're gonna love this, because I wanted something cool that had kind of a competition look, so I went to Moon Eyes, got this 4.5-inch polished aluminum flip cap. Looks like it came off of an old Shelby Cobra. It's gonna look awesome on that Bronco. And mounting it up is just a matter of cutting the flange to fit the body line, drilling a few holes. That is sweet. Now, I told you when we started we were going to go fast, and we have, but you can sit back now, take a break, and relax, because we have to take a break. But don't go too far, because when we come back, more Crazy Horse. Welcome back to Trucks. If you're just getting here, oh, you got some catching up to do, because we are reassembling Crazy Horse and we're going pretty fast. So let me bring you up to date on what we've done so far. First, we put in the roll bar, the seats, seat belts, shifters, dash, drive shafts, and then we put on big fender flares and a really cool gas cap. Yeah, I told you it was a lot, but we're not done yet. Now we're going to move to the front of the rig and deal with some issues under the hood. Now, obviously, we're going to run power brakes on this thing, and you should too if you're running any kind of a big tire or doing performance driving where that power assist can help you get things stopped. Now, the kit we're using is from James Duff, includes the master cylinder, the booster, the mounting bracket, even the proportioning valve. Now, you're probably wondering about this kind of weird looking mounting bracket and that pivot shaft. Well, it's got a purpose. Check it out. Since the engine compartment on the Bronco is so tight, you really don't have any room here where the stock master cylinder was to run a power booster. What this bracket does is relocates everything off to the side here so you can run a booster. You can still get your valve covers off, work on your headers. That's really nice. But the best part is it bolts right here to the stock holes. All right, on to the engine. Now, obviously, it looks really good, but it is a little naked, meaning that it doesn't have any accessories on it, but we're going to change that if you will follow me over to the table. First, let's talk about brackets and pulleys. Now, you can spend forever hunting the salvage yards, trying to find the right stuff, and if you do find it, well, you got to clean it up and paint it and make it work. Now, a much better option is to go to March Performance, get some of their aluminum brackets and pulleys. In this case, we're going with a serpentine system. This is the setup for power steering. This is the setup for your alternator, and this is the setup for air conditioning. Of course, you have your crank and your water pump pulleys. All right, they look good now. How about after I get them really muddy? Well, March Performance puts a poly coating on all their stuff so you don't have to polish them all the time and they'll always look good. All right, how about accessories? Well, we knew we needed to have something tough, so it was only fitting we went to Tough Stuff Performance for those. Now, the alternator is a powerful 100-amp alternator with a one-wire hookup. The starter is a just as powerful gear reduction starter so we don't end up stranded on the trail. For those of you that have ever burned up a starter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For power steering, we got a Saginaw power steering pump that will work really well with that James Duff box down on the frame. And to keep everything cool, we got a super cool water pump. Now, don't let this fancy chrome finish here fool you. These are tough, high-performance parts first. They just happen to put them in a really nice package. Installing the brackets is just a matter of bolting them on, using the supplied bolts and the spacers. And the accessories just bolt onto those. Now, here's what we've got. We've got a dual serpentine system. One belt runs from the crank over the alternator, over the water pump. The other belt runs from the crank over the power steering, over the air conditioning compressor, if you're going to use that, under the idler, and back down. Simple, clean, and when they get muddy, all I have to do is hose them off. Now take a look at those. Those look good. The last thing I'm going to put on today is just as simple as those pulleys and brackets, and it's a radiator and a fan shroud. Because because one of the biggest problems you run into when you're four-wheeling is overheating. So we got these from James Duff Enterprises. This is a nice, thick aluminum radiator made specifically for the Bronco, and it'll handle a high horsepower engine and keep it cool. Now all your fittings are welded into place. You even have bungs for automatic transmission. Since we're using a 5-speed, we'll go ahead and just plug those. Fan shroud is always a good idea because this focuses your airflow through the radiator, keeps the fan from pulling air in from the sides. Now, of course, these just mount up in the stock location using these brackets that come with the kit. And that's it. No, really, that's it. We need to take a break. Hey, welcome to Trucks. I've got a great show for you today. Is this cool or what? Now, we got some four-wheel drive stuff, got some classic truck stuff, even have a really sweet bike. But before I get sidetracked, let me show you the first thing that we're going to work on today. We're going to take care of some of the details on Project Crazy Horse. Now, as you can see, this thing is almost finished. It's almost ready to take down the trail. But after today, it's going to be even closer. The first thing we're going to put on it are these James Duff tubular pre-runner bumpers. Now, these not only look good, these are a true off-road bumper, so they are very strong. Now, this powder coating, we sent them off to a place called Color Coated to have that done because powder coating is a lot stronger than paint. To install the bumper, slide in the frame supports, followed by the bumper, and then finally just bolt them on. While I'm back here with the tailgate off, it's a good time to do something about a spare tire. You've got a couple choices here, bumper or bed, and either one can be a little bit of a challenge if you're using a 35-inch or bigger tire. Now, since our bumper doesn't have any place to mount a tire, we're going to put it in the bed because that looks really cool on these half cabs, and also this little Bronco bed is perfect for carrying all your four-wheel drive gear. So, to mount the tire in, we went to a place called RJR Products, got this tire mount. It's a lightweight design, but still very strong, and it will allow you to mount big diameter tires. Now, of course, it comes with all the bracketry and hardware to put it in. Now, this will not only allow you to pull out the tire in just seconds, but it'll also allow you to pull out the whole mount in just seconds if you want to use this bed for something else. First, decide where you want to mount the thing by centering it up in the bed. Then, mark your holes for your mounting plates. And then, drill your holes. Now, with the brackets bolted on, this is how the mount slides into them. Finally, just mount your tire. Now, I told you that looked good in a Bronco. Gives it just a little bit of desert racer feel. Parnelli would be proud. Now, while I'm back here in the bed, I have something else I need to put in here, a battery, or two. Since the engine compartment on most vehicles is a little tight, it's always nice to be able to relocate the battery and get it out of there. In the bed of that Bronco is going to be a perfect spot. Also, if you do any kind of off-roading, having dual batteries is a really good idea, especially if you use a winch or any kind of off-road lights. So I've put together a system. Let's check it out. First thing we're going to do is put in a couple of Optima yellow top deep cycle batteries because of their quick recovery time. These have 950 cranking amps each. You got the option of side or top posts, and the Optima is sealed so you can literally mount this thing in any position with no problem. To connect those two batteries, we're going to use a dual battery kit that we got from Wild Horses, and it includes cables and wiring and hardware and relays and switches, everything that you're going to need to hook up a dual battery system and get the most benefit out of it. Now, you don't want to just mount these batteries out in the weather. You want to put them in something. So for that, I went to Mr. Gasket, got a couple of these battery boxes, and these will not only protect the battery, but they also come with cables and hardware and all kinds of stuff to help you hook it up. Matter of fact, putting this whole system in is as simple as bolting in the box and making your connections. Now that we know where the spare tire is going to go, we can mount the battery boxes around it. up against the bulkhead is the perfect place. Okay, now it's time to deal with some questions you might have about a dual battery setup. Now, in this application, I'm going to run them in parallel. Now, what this means is the positive of one battery will connect to the positive of the other. The negative will go to the negative. This will double your amps, but still keep everything 12 volt. Now, if you hook them up in series, here's what you have. Negative out. This positive connects to this negative, then you have your positive out. This gives you 24 volt and will burn down all your 12 volt accessories and probably your wiring harness. Yeah, you don't want to do that. So make sure that you're hooking up in parallel unless you're specifically building a rig to handle a 24 volt system. All right, with all this talk about batteries, let's move up here to the front and see why I'm going to need all that extra power. Obviously, this is a winch bumper, so let's talk winches. I got this baby from Mile Marker, and it is a hoss. It's a 12,000 pound electric winch, has a powerful 5.5 horsepower motor, line holding brake, power in and out, 3/8" cable. Yeah, this is the good stuff. Comes with accessories, roller fair lead, remote, and for a few dollars more, you can get this wireless remote system so you can control the winch with the push of a button, no wire hookup. Pretty slick. But the best part about this is a true 12,000 pound winch. It will bolt into the same spot of the smaller 9,000 pound winch, and it's only about 20 pounds heavier. Installation is as simple as bolting on the winch, the fair lead, and making your electrical connections. Now, there is one other thing I'm going to put on up here, and it's going to suck some power too, and that's these off-road lights. Now, these big old boys are from Extreme Suspensions, and they are basically a redesign of the old Dick CPEC C900 Super Off-Roaders. Now, they feature a 130 watt halogen bulb that kicks out 310,000 candle power. Now, they have a dual design lens that not only throws a light long, like miles long, but also throws it wide so you see what's around you. Now, to hook these up, I also got one of their dual relays and dual switch kits, because using a relay is the only way to hook these kind of lights up properly. Well, that finishes off what I wanted to do on the front, the lights, the winch, the bumper, and the rear, the spare tire, the batteries, the bumper. Now, obviously, I've got a few more things to do on here. I've got wiring to put in and glass, and the roof needs to go on, but I'll take care of that later, because after the break, I'm going to show you what to do when those new parts you're putting on aren't quite fitting the way you want them to. Sometimes you need to persuade them a little bit. Welcome back. You know, some of the comments that I get when I'm out at shows or wherever is, man, you make this stuff look easy. It just falls into place, and you must have a lot of people helping you, right? Well, the answer is no, no, and no. No, it's not that easy. No, it doesn't just fall into place, and no, there's not a lot of people helping me. Just me and a TV crew. The reason I tell you this is because one thing I like to do on the show here is show you some of the problems that come up when you're building a rig and how to deal with them. That's why they call it do-it-yourself. Sometimes you have to make it work. Got a prime example here for you. Follow me. Okay, you may remember on Crazy Horse that this B&M shifter is exactly what I wanted to make this thing really shift right. Unfortunately, this is the only handle available with that shifter for that transmission. And since this is a custom application, well, it's not in the most ideal spot. It's a little forward up toward the dash, a little bit of a reach. It'd be much better if it was right back here, because you want to be able to come right off of the steering wheel, boom, right down onto the shifter. So, what are you going to do? Well, you could heat it and bend it, but you've already got a bend here. That would have to be straightened. There's a better way to do it. I went out and got this chrome Hurst handle, and it will put the shifter exactly where it needs to be. So, I cut off this stub off of an old Hurst shifter. Now all I have to do is set it in place and make a cut mark. Then cut off the old B&M handle and true up the end. Now weld the new stub onto the shaft. Now this is one area that I prefer the TIG welder because of the small, precise welds, great strength and penetration, but a MIG will work too. With your welding done, go ahead and paint the part so it doesn't rust, and then bolt on the shifter and then put on the handle. Now here's what we've got. Have our performance shifter. Now we have an arm that comes up exactly where we wanted it. That is sweet. Now we're going to finish it off with one of these low-car boots, and that will be that. Now this was pretty easy. This didn't take very long, and hopefully this shows you that you don't have to settle for what comes out of the box. If it's not right, take a little bit of time, make it fit your application perfectly. Hey, welcome to Trucks. You are gonna love today's show because today's the day that we take Crazy Horse out and put it through the paces. Now, you may not recognize it yet, but this is Crazy Horse, covered with a beautiful coat of mud. But before we show you how it got into this condition, here's a reminder of what we showed you last week with the buildup of the grinding and the welding and all the work that went into this rig, and what it looked like before we got it muddy. What a piece of junk! Check this out. All right, now that the reminder is done and everything's bolted down for the last time, it's time to see what this thing's really made of in every kind of driving situation imaginable. The first thing we needed to look at was the drivability and the road manners. We're buzzing along here at about 65 miles an hour. RPMs are about 2,500. That is right where we want it. This thing's tooling right down the road. Notice that there is no shimmy in the steering wheel. Take the hands off, drives right down the road. This is what we want. Not only did the rig track down the road well at freeway speeds, but the dirt grip tires didn't make near the noise I thought they would. Pretty amazing considering the aggressive tread. Now you may notice that my steering wheel is not exactly trued up, and you know that that is a pet peeve of mine, but with this Bronco you've got one gauge off to the side, and the type of steering wheel I've got here, that puts the spokes right out over my gauges. So I've purposely cocked it just a little bit so I can see my gauges well when I'm going down the road. Now that may drive me crazy after a while, but right now I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, with our steering and our suspension all checked out and our gauges reading where they were supposed to, it was time to uncork this thing and see what kind of power and performance we had on tap. This is great. Not only does the truck have an awesome sound, but also the power to throw you back in the seat whenever you stomp on it. Now add to that the joy of shifting your own gears, and you've got the ingredients for one incredible driving experience. For you guys that have ever wanted a muscle car that was four-wheel drive, you need to look into an early Bronco. They are sweet. Of course, all this ripping and hot rodding revealed two things. First, our power steering belt took a holiday due to a slight pulley misalignment. The heck was that? Which, of course, was easily corrected. The second, well, the second's not quite so easy to fix. It's a thirsty little sucker. Now, to make sure Crazy Horse isn't just some sissy, fair-weather rig, we also ventured out on some cold, rainy, snowy days just to see how it handled it. This is actually a really good test because we're out here on a bad weather day doing a payoff on this rig to see if it's really roadworthy. looks pretty roadworthy to me, except for those wipers. Somebody needs to develop a kit to synchronize the windshield wipers on a Bronco. And one thing's for sure, if you ever want to live to father children, make sure that you install your heater before you do a test drive in the middle of the winter. Son, it's freezing.
And other than being a little drafty, it's up to par with anything running down the road. However, high horsepower, a 5-speed, and a locker in the rear can make this thing a little squirrely when things get wet and slick.
One thing that a lot of people don't know is if you're running a locker or any kind of limited slip in bad weather, you need to be careful because that rear end will come right out from underneath you quicker than you can imagine.
Okay, enough of that. How about handling? Now, even though it's pretty obvious that Crazy Horse will never be mistaken for a sports car, we wanted to see how it did in everything from some twisty turns to freeway off-ramps. Now, while it does have some body lean, it never felt excessive or tippy. However, if you push it a little bit, like we did around the cones, the hardcore off-road suspension becomes evident pretty quick. But what the heck, it's a Bronco! So after subjecting it to the embarrassment of the slalom course, we decided to run a different kind of slalom course, one specifically for 4-wheel drive rigs.
Bonsai.
Of course, that's just a hint of what's to come, because now it's time to get off the pavement and let this horse run. So hold on, we go off-road after the break. Welcome back to Trucks and the long-awaited payoff of Project Crazy Horse. Now, so far we've looked at the on-road capabilities of this little 66 half-cab Bronco, and it's been great, but that's only part of what it is. The other part begins when you get off the pavement. Now, there are a lot of different aspects of off-road driving. And we're going to look at all of them just to see how well-rounded this rig is. And since it's paying tribute to Parnelli's legendary Baja racer, Big Ole, stability at speed is a must. Now, running this rig down a dirt road or across the field with the pedal down is a major rush. As the suspension absorbs the rough terrain like it's not even there. And if the bumps are too big, well, we'll just fly right over them.
Now you've seen what it'll do in 2-wheel drive. Now let's see what it'll do in 4-wheel drive.
With the rig locked into 4-wheel drive, it was time to start wheeling. And the first thing I wanted to look at was the approach and departure angles of the vehicle, as well as the overall flex and movement of the suspension.
Man, so far this old Bronco has pretty much made a joke of everything I've done, making it real easy. This is quite the rig.
With that done and everything checked out, we moved on to the rocks where we could really flex this thing and see what it was capable of. The big fender cutouts and high ground clearance kept the tires and rocks from ever hitting the body, and we flexed and walked our way through the rocks without any problems. The low-range crawl ratio was good, but there were a few times I wished I had a little lower first gear. Now, as far as traction goes, if I was going to use this rig as primarily a rock crawler, I'd put a locker in the front instead of the limited slip. That would solve this problem, and we would go over the rock instead of pushing it. Another obstacle that's pretty common when you go off-roading is the steep hill climb. Not just the short little quick ones, but also the long, steep ones that require a rig that's not going to puke out and die on you halfway up the hill. This kind of hill is what makes the guys running carburetors cringe and use the bypass trail.
She's making it look easy.
However, Crazy Horse went up it like it was out for a Sunday drive. Coming back down was another story, as it revealed one weakness that will have to be fixed. Now, due to the type of oil pan I'm running and the steepness of the grade, all the oil ran to the front and uncovered the sump, which starved the engine of oil.
Chris, I shut it off because I had no oil pressure. My sump got empty. Copy.
No oil meant I had to shut it down to prevent damage and freewheel the rig down the mountain, which is never a good thing. A different oil pan or an oil accumulator will solve this problem. We'll be back with more Crazy Horse after this. Hey, welcome back to Trucks and the Crazy Horse Payoff. Now, you've seen it on the road, in the rocks, on the hills. We still got a lot more to do, so strap in, because here we go. At this point, it was time to get this truck a little wet. So, into the river we went, to play on some wet rocks. And of course, the crew always comes prepared, and Chris thought that those waders would be enough to keep him dry, but I just couldn't resist.
We've all been here. Anybody who's worked with Stacey for any period of time has been where I am right now.
While Chris was drying out, we decided to test the suspension yet another way. And even with a heavy winch on the front, nothing flies like a Bronco. Of course, the final muddy obstacles for this truck are the toughest, because they involve a little bit of everything we've seen so far. And they will do some damage if your rig's not up to it. And the only way to drive them is to attack them. And the only real casualty of the day was the poor spare tire mount whose mounting brackets just weren't up to the abuse and finally decided it had had enough and exited the rig in a big mud hole.
I guess we need a new one of those.
And, well, you know, there was that thing with Mo's camera.
Everybody good?
Yeah, Mo's great.
But no matter what we threw at it, Crazy Horse took it and just begged for more. What an awesome rig!
Now, some of you may be thinking, oh man, I can't believe you just went out and thrashed this truck. Well, believe it, because you deserve to see what it's capable of. But I didn't thrash it. No, man. I built this thing to be able to do exactly what I just did to it, and more. Trust me, this thing wasn't even breathing hard. And as far as the way it looks, well, we'll just roll it in and clean it up. It will look just as good as when we started, and that is a well-rounded vehicle. But the best part about this build-up is hopefully now you can see that it's possible to take something that is a total piece of junk and turn it into something really special if you add your time, your skill, your money, and some aftermarket parts. So, the ball is in your court. Get out there and build something. Expect to see you on the trail.
Trucks is an RTM production.